Good morning, everybody, and welcome to The Artist's Well. This is our third season, and even though it's episode 1, it's actually the 81st episode in total of what we've done, which is super. Now, my special guest this morning is Lenny Abrahamson. Lenny is, amongst various other things, president of the United Arts Club, and that's how I know him. But Lenny has as many gongs and nominations for Oscars as you could shake a stick at. And he has had a phenomenal meteoric career. And I'm really looking forward to having a chat to him about that. But first, I'd like to know why he went to Trinity to study physics and philosophy. Has that anything to do with the movies? Or had he intended at that point to actually go into the movies? Good morning, Lenny.
Good morning, Alan, and thanks so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with everybody. So yeah, I was, I was interested in all sorts of things as a teenager, and I certainly loved cinema. I mean, I was sort of addicted to the screen in any way that I could get it. I watched television. I used to sit in the house when, waiting for the TV to start on a Saturday morning, waiting for the kids' programs to start. And I loved everything to do with the cinema, but I think it didn't figure as a possible life for me at that point, maybe because it seemed like a sort of an outrageous thing to imagine doing as a kid in Dublin at that time in the 70s, I suppose. But I was really interested in ideas and books and all sorts. And I was also, I think, in a way which is not a good thing, very concerned with being clever, and I don't know that I know other kids are, you see it in children sometimes, that desire to sort of achieve and please and and somehow the physics thing, although I was really interested in it, it also sounded like it was officially the hardest thing you could study, theoretical physics. So I'm going to do it because that'll just prove, to everybody. There was just this huge emphasis in my house, in my family, towards academic success,
Yes.
And there were various members of the family going back who'd done very well, and that was the lore of the house I grew up in. But then I did study physics for a while, physics and maths, and I did enjoy it, but it wasn't what I sort of was really interested in, which was the sort of, it's an awful lot of maths, and I was good at it, but not amazing. And there were two people in the class who I remember just going, okay, so that's what it looks like when it's really your thing, Yeah,
and also just first class honors, didn't you?
Well, I did it. I got first class honors in philosophy when I flipped. So I flipped over to, I flipped after 2 years of physics and maths to philosophy, which felt like home then. I really, when I got into philosophy, it was that combination of the kind of the sort of general fascination with the world and being and the human condition, which tallied with my love of the arts and literature, and that felt like it was the kind of a much more central kind of place for me to be, and I loved it. But while I was doing that, I had this friend, Ed Guiney, who I'd known since we were about 15. Ed was in Gonzaga. I was in high school in Rathgar, and but Ed's school used to go to parties with my sister's school, and I used to tag along. And I met him at these like teenage parties.
Yes.
And he was fascinated with film, and I was too. And we talk about it. And when I was in college doing philosophy, Ed rang me and said, I want to set up I want to set up something that allows us to make some films. And it's really interesting because the dynamic of our careers together, and we still work together, is very much that Ed is the one who makes things happen and does things. I'm the one who sort of thinks about it and goes, God, that would be fascinating. And then would probably not do anything. So I'm very lucky to.
A bit modest there now.
Well, so we set up this group, Trinity Filmmakers Group, and started to mess around with video. And that was the first time I think I thought, ooh, maybe this is a real possibility for me, because I was sort of halfway split between academia when I graduated and film, and actually I went to Stanford to do a PhD in philosophy, but I was kind of in two minds about it when I went. I got a scholarship, and therefore it was it felt like a risk. I could just go and see what it was like, and And I did, again, the subject is fascinating, but the academic life and the limited communication you have in terms of the people that you're talking to.
Mm.
And then just this kind of more maverick energy that I think I probably have, which lent me towards trying to be an artist ultimately.
Yes.
And so I was playing, I made this short called Three Joes when I graduated from Trinity. And while I was at Stanford, that started to kind of travel a bit and show at proper festivals. And I remember talking to my friends, they were all at the Cork Film Festival where it had won the prize, and they were all drunk and having a really good time. And I was writing an essay on Kant in a kind of in a very quiet town out in
Yes.
California. And so I'd always make the joke that I went the wrong way. You know, most people leave Ireland and go to California in an effort to become a filmmaker. I left California and returned to Dublin when I decided, yes, cinema is for me.
Yeah, yeah. And did you have a leaning towards a particular genre in filmmaking?
Yeah,
because I get the impression that your work is very much consumed with the sort of the human condition, as you said yourself, rather than, you know, horror, action, blah blah blah.
Yeah, genre has never interested me really.
Okay.
I think, you know, so as a kid I watched everything, but as I started to get on into my late teens and discovered kind of European cinema, I think that's where I went, oh my God, that's a, you know, there used to be, and it's a really interesting thing, and you think about how kind of oddly, even though we can now watch everything, you know, you can sign up for, you can find every film you want, and in those days you couldn't. However, people tend to become very bunkered in what they watch. You know, they just seek out the same things. Back in the time I'm thinking about, like early 80s, late 70s, I was, you know, all there was what was on the TV or in the cinema. But BBC too used to screen European masters cinema in, you know, late at night when they didn't have anything else to show. And I just watched all these films and saw Fellini and Bergman and you know, Ozu and people like that I'd never heard of. And that was the kind of point for me where cinema and my interests already in ideas in literature and that stuff became kind of fused.
I know.
And that's what was sort of motivating me as I went on.
Okay. Now, tell me, for the uninitiated, I'm one of them. Can you explain the difference between a director, a producer, a cameraman, a sound man? You know, because there's all these people.
Yeah.
They all seem to have very specific different jobs, and they must gel together. But can you sort of do a quick definition of what is a film director? Because you don't use the camera, do you?
No. Sometimes, I mean, I do occasionally operate the camera if I just want to be looking through during a take, but I'm not a particularly good camera person. So what the director, like, if you think about it, you know, you somehow assume when you see a film that this event is kind of happening and the camera is just like, you know, recording it. But, you know, from the beginning of the process, that's what God, this is such a big question. So, I mean, the conventional answer is
rather than anything else.
Yeah, the conventional answer is the director is the author of the film. And that's true in cinema much more than in television, although that's changing radically now. So like in the most basic way, when we arrive on set, I will have been involved. I've probably written something on the script, if not done my own draft, but I will, like, who's in it is the decision that I make. So the casting, putting the crew together is something that I'm central to. So choosing the collaborators, but then working with the actors to create the characters, deciding literally where people are in the room, where the camera is, how the story unfolds, how the sequences come together, how they're paced. So, you know, you walk into a room, well, do we discover you there? Do we wait for you? Do we go in with you? In whose perspective are we? So it's quite technical, what shots you take, where the camera is, whether it moves or not, what the people are doing, how the actors are performing. So the actual decisions about the making of it. And then you'll say to the camera operator, okay, I want you to be over here. And as the person walks here, I want us to, you know, whether it's track or handheld. So how the camera is operated is also your decision, but you just don't hold it.
Sure.
But there is one thing that's worth saying. which is there comes a point in the process where I think the luxury or the kind of necessity for the director is to drop their professional perspective and actually just become what I often describe as just the human being in the room, because there are, you know, the camera person is concerned about all sorts of things as they shoot. The cinematographer is watching the monitor, looking at the lighting. The grip is deciding when, you know, I've said, listen, I want you to push the dolly this slow and go on this line and end on this line in this frame. And that's what they're thinking about. So I'm the person in the room that has nothing to do while the camera is rolling.
Interesting.
And my job at that point is to say to myself, and the fundamental question that I always have somewhere deep down is, do I believe this? And if I don't, what do I have to change to make this feel truthful?
Yeah. So you're really sitting in the viewer's chair.
Exactly. And that's the sort of privilege of it, you know. But it's also the scary bit, because then if it's not working and everybody can feel it's not working, all the eyes sort of go to you as to so
the buck stops,
you know,
there.
This is crap. What are we going to do?
Exactly. Yeah. But and how much of that is pre-staged in terms of you sitting down with a bunch of people saying, look, we're good, because the money starts rolling the minute you go on set. So
yes.
Outside of that, it's cheap.
Exactly. So the preparation is a massive part of it. In fact, it's the make or break. And typically there's this, what you might call, there's the development process, which starts when you start talking about the project and working on the script and thinking about putting it together, what it is. But then you go into what you might call soft prep, which is where you're like starting to have real conversations about what crew you're going to have, starting to make initial inquiries, starting to do kind of thinking about locations, maybe visiting places, doing all that stuff. But then the full prep, where you have like often a very, very big number of people, you might have 50 or 60 people by the end of prep already working in an office that's got together specifically for that job. So on a film, the prep could take 10 weeks, you know, for the full preparation, where you're really, everybody's working, you know, full time, could take 10 weeks for an 8-week shoot. And so, yes, you're right. You're trying to understand it as deeply as possible. You're having lots of meetings with designers and costume designers and casting. You're casting probably from earlier. So like typically a film is in the wonderful scenario where, like, say, actually take something like Normal People, where it was unusually quick because we got what they call the green light from the BBC, based purely on the novel and our group of creative people doing the novel. And the BBC said, okay, if you can get the rights to that novel, we will shoot it next year. That almost never happens. Normally there's like a year's worth of writing scripts and treatments and hawking them around and getting, yes, we like it, but could you change this? And eventually somebody says, right, we'll make it. So the very, very best case scenario was Normal People, where we read the books, said, what do you think? Vote of confidence in us and our big risk, and said, right, we will fund it if you can get the rights, because it was a competitive situation on the rights to the novel. And us being able to say to Sally, we actually have a green light to make this. Like, it's nobody else has that. Nobody is ever going to have that before it exists. So in that scenario, it still was a year before we shot. Because it took a year, and that was super quick to get the novel into shape as a series of screenplays and put together the crew and cast. And that was a year, and then it's another year, nearly 8 months or so before it's on the screen. That's super quick. I mean, that almost never happens. You're looking more like 3 or 4 years often.
Really? And when you do all this planning, Lenny, does it ever get to the stage where you're sort of halfway through the actual filming when you say, hold on, that's not working out the way we thought? Or you feel you have to change the direction or something like that?
Yes, I think that's the other thing that I feel like whenever I give any sort of do any sort of educating stuff with filmmakers, I always say this, that I remember watching this brilliant, I think it was a conductor like Zubin Mehta or one of the great conductors, or George Schulte or somebody like that, giving a masterclass. And this young conductor got up to do his bit. And I thought he was amazing, you know, as a non-specialist watching, he was full of intensity and giving loads of gestures. And then Schulte said, you know, that's great, but you're conducting the imaginary orchestra in your head. You're not conducting the actual musicians in front of you. So And that for me is the single best kind of piece of advice when it comes to the kind of work that I do. I think it's different if you're a novelist or a painter, probably, although there still probably is something in your mind and something in front of you. And for me, it's recognizing, it's being able to switch off from the image that you had and watch what's in front of you and really work with that, and embrace the fact that it will be a bit different.
Yes.
Because I think what often happens is people are kind of in a box ticking state as directors, because it's a scary thing to do, especially early on when you have a whole crew around you and there's a lot of money at stake, and people are kind of looking at you and you don't know if they think you're any good and all that sort of stuff. So you do a take and you do a couple of takes of something, and it's very, very tempting to go, everybody think that's good, everybody seems to think it's good, that's done, let's move on to the next thing. But you're not then engaging with it really, So for me, I think it's very good, that feeling you describe of looking at something and going, what's not right about this? Not so much that it doesn't exactly fit the thing you had in your mind in prep, but just more, it doesn't feel like it's its best self.
Yes.
That's the thing to go towards, rather than kind of the natural tendency is to hope that you're wrong, hope that it'll all work out okay, not show any kind of uncertainty or weakness in front of the crew of people, especially when you start, who are way more experienced and older mostly than you. But then you're not doing your job, and actually they don't want you to be doing that. They want you to do the bit that you're supposed to do, which is to take hold of the feeling of the thing and guard it and make it as good as it can be.
So I presume you don't, after a take, then say, well, what did you think of that, guys?
No. Yeah, I've heard terrible stories. Yeah, exactly. There's also that thing of, people talk about in soccer losing the dressing room. Yes. Where a manager suddenly just loses the authority with the players, and there's absolutely the equivalent on a film set, where if people start to think you don't know what you're doing, it's very hard to get them back.
Now, Lenny, there's a number of other areas we want to move into, but before we do, just sticking with the film, and I know people will have questions to do with that specifically, but in case it's not asked, one thing that I'm fascinated about is music and the emotion music brings to cinema, to film, and how really, the acting is naked unless it's got some music and the effect that has. How on earth do you choose that?
Well, it's a combination of things. So up until very recently, it's all been original composed music. I've never done what they call needle drops, where you, well, there's two different types. Sometimes people will go and find a piece of existing classical music or whatever, and they'll clear the rights to it. And that I have done that.
Yeah.
And then there's the thing of using contemporary songs and things like that, which is a very kind of commercial approach. It can be. And I haven't really done that up until the last two things. But it's usually, I work with the same. So I'm lucky. I said I've been working with Ed since we were 15. And I've been working with a man called Stephen Rennick since, well, we weren't working together when we were 9, but we knew we were in school, primary school together.
Yeah.
Stephen was always a brilliant musician. And as time went on, he started composing, and when we were just messing around. And he still is. And we actually had this lovely event in the concert hall a few weeks ago, where the concert orchestra, they screened Room with a live orchestra with Stephen's score. Wonderful. Which was really lovely. But that's a really interesting collaboration, because as a director, now I am somewhat musical, and so I know I can talk a little bit of the technicals about, what I feel about a piece and whatever. And I used to play a bit, and I used to play with Stephen, so that's good because we've got a sort of language together. But it's not like other things where you can say to a designer, no, I think, that wallpaper, please. Because it's this ineffable thing. And so you try, it's trial and error, and sometimes you use temp tracks. So in other words, something that you think might be in the right territory, you put that up against picture, you see whether it does what you want it to do. And then you have that discussion with the composer. Very organic kind of muddle in a good way. Yes. Until you arrive at, sometimes what will happen is there'll be one piece in my case, which Stephen writes, which we both go, aha, that's the key to the, that's the key to the, I remember with Adam and Paul, we had this idea of a kind of marking out the Europeanness of the film, and also its odd sort of gypsy, Central Europeanness And so this idea of a kind of village band somewhere in the Czech Republic kind of popped into everybody's head, and that's where this strange kind of lumbering but lovely soundtrack emerged from.
Yes. So that's really you and the composer, is it?
So it's me and the composer, and the other person, and then if we're looking for tracks from existing music, sometimes would work with a music supervisor. And a music supervisor is somebody who has a massive encyclopedic knowledge of the world of music. Yeah. And what will happen then is, in my case, a wonderful woman called Juliette Martin will throw millions of tracks at me and the editor. And Nathan, the editor, is very musical as well. He's got a great library. So he'll go, here, have a listen to this.
Yeah.
And then we all listen, and it is ultimately luckily, because I've been lucky enough to have the, control, but I've never had to impose. I never have to go, no, you're all wrong, get out. I'm doing it my way. It is a collaborative process.
Yes.
And then we decide what's going to go in. So that is part of my job. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, let's move away from film a little bit and talk about your sort of contact with art in the general sense, and your background and so on. Is there anything sort of that would show us how you really came to be who you are today? Because most of the people watching this now are visual artists, so they'd be looking at everything you've said, and I must say it can translate beautifully to
yes.
a visual artist. Do you know what they're doing?
I mean, I think it's sort of interesting that you discover sort of what you are as you go. I wasn't the sort of person who was like begging my parents for a Super 8 camera at 8 years old or 10 years old. I wasn't running around pretending to blow up spaceships in the back garden, with a camera. It wasn't, so it's not that sort of Spielberg story where you, my interest was in so as a younger person, it was like, I was books where I found the things that I found most moving and most kind of opening, and actually visual art. Then in my late teens, I remember going to galleries and seeing, for example, so the Dutch masters, and just seeing these faces, the cold light, and these faces that seem to have the most extraordinary depth. And so I was just a very engaged, very kind of questioning sort of kid. And cinema came later as this odd synthesis of lots of things that I'm interested in. Yeah. Literature, visual art, drama. And interestingly enough, for me, plays were never part of it, really. Theatre was much less part of it. And I think theatre and film are so different. Film is a kind of, film, there is ultimately a narrator. There is somebody bringing you through this experience, saying, look at this now, don't look at that. And so that somehow that kind of marriage, that kind of, in the way that opera marries lots of forms, cinema marries lots of forms, and I'm a kind of magpie, No,
it's interesting you talk about. It's interesting you talk about the Dutch painters and so on, because you can see a bit of an analogy between some of the scenes, say in Normal People, where your lighting and everything else is very much how an artist would set it up.
Well, it is. I'm always interested in a kind of, I think, I can't stand pretty lighting, beautiful lighting, yes, but the kind of, I don't think our job as filmmakers should be just, well, that's not true, because there's room for everything. Chocolate box, exactly. And so that, like, trying to find that look, say with Normal People, of something which is kind of cold and real but not ordinary, is a very hard, it's a very thin line, it's a very kind of small space to land in. And I work with this wonderful cinematographer called Susie Lavelle. She's from Achill Island. She's started as a photographer, and she's now she's going through the roof as a cinematographer. But she has that same impulse. And we looked at lots of paintings, and lots of photos, like Nan Golden photography, and lots of really amazing photographers, to find this sort of feeling of it. And yes, yeah, it's certainly not. It is that same painterly thing that I think is so beautiful to play with.
Sure. And talking about painters and artists, was there any connection with your parents to some notable painters and
Yes.
artists that seem to?
Yeah, well,
Paul.
my folks, neither of them. My dad was artistic, you know. He painted, he sculpted a bit, and actually showed a bit in the RHA, but he was a solicitor. That was his job.
Yes.
But his father, my namesake, was this quite famous doctor back in the, I don't know, 40s probably, as height of his. And he, among his patients were the Beckett family on the one hand, and the Yeatses. So he had this amazing collection of Jack Yeats paintings, because Jack Yeats used to pay him in paintings, and unfortunately they didn't come down. None of them came down to me. But I remember when I was 21, my dad had, for my birthday, found this thing. He was passing an antique shop, and there was an old menu from Jamais, which we were talking about earlier, this famous restaurant in Dublin. And it was a dinner in honor of Jack Yeats, and there was like 10 of his friends there. And they'd all signed this menu, and one of them was my grandfather. It's my name. And there was a little horse, a little pen drawing of a horse on the menu done by Yeats. So I have that.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, which is amazing.
Fabulous.
And but then the other great story was, you know, because there's always, family's very big on my grandfather being this amazing man. And I was reading this biography of Beckett, and I saw a mention in the appendix of Leonard Abrahamson. I thought, oh, there we go. It's going to be, you know, some story about my grandfather. And I looked it up, and it was about like the most traumatic kind of thing in Beckett's life was the death of his father, who he's very close to. And it describes how he had this kind of mild heart attack, and the eminent cardiologist Leonard Abrahamson was whisked out to the house, examined him and said, not a bother, you know, he's grand. It'd be grand, just a bit of rest and he'll be fine. And then he left, and, you know, 15 minutes later, he had this massive heart attack and died. So I thought, there we go. That's my legacy. That's my grandfather's legacy.
That's very unfortunate. Very unfortunate. So, Lenny, what do you do in your downtime when you're not filming and thinking about films and all of that? Have you any sort of hobbies or interests?
Yeah, you know, I wish I should have more, because I think it's incredibly healthy. So I've two dogs who I really love. These two mad rescue lurchers. So running around with them. But our kids are still quite young, so 14 and 11. Okay. And our 14-year-old boy he's kind of doesn't take much minding now. He just wanders around in a cloud of lynx, and you know, wants to go to the spar shop for a chicken fillet roll, or you know, meet his friends. And our daughter now, she's 11, and she's very kind of, you know, still very like connected in terms of things we do in the weekend. But I suppose I do odd things, like we moved house. So this is a project, and that's taking up a lot of time. Moved house into this, and you can see this sort of strange, well, it's not strange, actually quite nice kind of arts and crafts wallpaper.
Where did the hole in the wall go?
The hole in the wall, because the family's in the kitchen, so I had to close the door. Okay. So Alan thought there was a lovely painting behind me in the space behind that door. It's actually a hole in the wall.
I thought it was an installation, Lenny, not.
Yes, it's conceptual, Alan. Yeah, exactly. So we bought this place in Loughlinstown, which is an old glebe house, but it's an odd house. It was split into two in the 50s, so we have most of it, and then our lovely neighbors have a chunk of it, and so that's a big project of restoration. But I'm bad. I potter around, and I you know, I have a real tendency towards kind of anxiety or kind of overthinking things. And I have to, so I end up either working or not, or just trying to sort of switch myself off, and I don't think that's so healthy. My dad was a great hobbyist. You know, he used to sculpt and, as I said, wood carve and things. And one of the great things about this place is what were old stables, not big, just to kind of, but two great sheds. So I think the shed is a very important part of life. I think if you can do something good with the shed, and that might be a place for me to sort of, I used to wood turn and things like that, and I might go back to that.
Yeah. So is there a lot of work to be done on this house?
Yeah,
in terms of getting it back to, because I did mention, you see, that you're involved in a conservation project. So this is it, isn't it? Yeah.
This is it. So we've been here 2 years, and we've been doing it bit by bit. So there is a lot of work is the answer. Yeah, because the oldest part is 1750s. And
sorry, can you say that again?
It's in remarkable 50s was the oldest part of the house.
Yeah.
But we've done, it's in very good shape. I think that for us, we thought when we moved from Rathmines, and we thought, look, this beautiful old house is pretty the same price as the house we're living in now in Dublin 6. Fantastic. But I don't think we were quite prepared for the amount of, work that would be. Now I realize why it was we thought relatively cheap.
Yes.
But so what we do have a fair bit. We're working with this lovely conservation architect called Neil Crimmins. He's a member of the Arts Club. Actually, I got him to join. I bullied him into joining, and so what we've been doing, we've just got our planning permission. We're not doing anything radical to the house at all. We just want to kind of bring it back to the way it was, but make it warm and all of that stuff. But there is a fair bit of work to do. But we've been working with lovely, amazing craftspeople, the plasterers who do the old lime plaster, and a roofer who so the roof and the outside walls are done, which means that the house is now weatherproof properly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But we'll have to move out at some point to do the kind of, all of the electrics and plumbing and everything like that we need to do.
Yeah, very good. Okay. One other question before I open it to the floor. And that is, I normally ask the visual artists who their favorite artist is, and if they could grab, steal, whatever, borrow one to hang over their mantelpiece, what would it be? And the answers are very interesting, because they're very often quite the opposite to their own particular style of art. But in your case, I'm not sure what to ask you, because it could be a piece of art, or it could be a film, or a director.
I mean, I think probably I was narrowing it down, just making notes to myself.
Yeah.
If I could have done anything at all, if I could have my name attached to any piece of work, not necessarily in my own field, it would probably be, one of the great pieces of chamber music, like, Schubert or Beethoven quartets, or, those are kind of, for me, the kind of just the most pure kind of expression of brilliance. But in film, my stuff is not like his at all, and I don't think anybody's is, and it's not original because, but Tarkovsky's film Mirror is such a perfect. I just highly recommend it. It opens with this woman sitting on a fence talking to a passing band passes, and then it's very, very, in a way, simple, but then it sort of opens out into the closest thing to the way in which the intensity of feeling of dreams might be. I don't think anybody before or after Tarkovsky had the same mastery of the medium. Absolute mastery. It's so Tarkovsky, Andrei Tarkovsky. His most famous film is a film called Andrei Rublev, about the icon painter, the famous Russian icon painter.
Oh, right, yeah. And Lenny, how would you get to see that? Would that be on Netflix, or?
It probably isn't on Netflix, but you will find it on iTunes or.
Oh, would you?
Yeah, you'll find it somewhere for sure. Yeah. It's an absolute, any of his films, but Mirror or Rublev, I think, are.
You sorted out my viewing for this evening.
Well, yeah. Let me know how you find it. I was sort of overwhelmed. I remember the first time I saw it in a film club, Mirror. Yeah. I didn't understand it, but I knew that it was something really special, and I've watched it many times since. I don't think it's the kind of thing that you decode, but it is amazing.
Whilst we're talking about films, have you any clips that you'd like to show us of some of your work?
Yeah, I was wondering. I mean, so I might just show you a little clip from Garage, which is and it's funny because Pat Short bumped into Connor J. Ryan, the boy who plays, for anybody who's seen it, there's a sort of man who works in a garage, and then he becomes friendly with this kid who comes to help him. and they just bumped into each other again. So I have a photograph of them 14 years later. But I'll play a little scene from Garage just to set it up. Josie is this kind of, you know, town sort of village joke in a way, but he's a kind of very attached to his own to the village. You know, he's its biggest fan, and the person who suffers most there, really. But he made a terrible mistake and showed a kind of porn image to this 15-year-old boy who was working with him, and the owner of the garage has come to let him go and tell him he's closing the place. But it's just how he chose to do it. It might be worth talking about. I'll just
lovely.
Put this on now.
It'll only take 2 minutes now.
You sure?
I'm sure. Sure. Strong?
No, not too strong.
Oh, this milk is all right. Do you think it's all right? It says 29th.
Sure, it's grand, Josie.
Spots. Damn. No.
It's fine, Josie.
Can I get them out? Only a few spots. It's an awful nuisance.
I think it's interesting because we never show the moment when Mr. Gallagher, the garage owner, tells Josie that he's closing the garage. What we watch is this ceremony of procrastination where Josie makes tea for him and then gets very flustered about the fact that the milk is maybe starting to go off and there are spots in the milk. And it's a really, I think, from Mark O'Halloran, a great piece of writing. And it's a way of doing what you're doing without directly getting into the kind of, you know, soapy dialogue that you might sometimes have in a scene like that. But what was interesting about it is we actually wrote the full dialogue, and we knew we weren't going to show it, but we filmed it because I didn't want the actors to aim towards the end, what I knew was the end of the scene.
Yes.
I didn't want them to sort of put a button on it, if you know what I mean. So they play right through it, but we stop at the point where we knew we were going to stop. So that was the clip I just showed, and then I can talk a little bit about the Frank clip, which is Frank explaining to John why he wears the head.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Why do you wear that?
You think it's weird?
Kinda.
Well, normal faces are weird too, you know? The way they're smooth, and then, you know, all bumpy and holes. I mean, what are eyes like? It's like a science fiction movie. Don't get me started on lips. Like the edges of a very serious wound.
That's true. But your head is still sort of intimidating.
Well, underneath, I'm giving you a welcoming smile. Would it help if I said my facial expressions out loud?
Well, maybe.
Welcoming smile.
Delighted look.
Frank in cinemas May 9.
It's a combination of things that I love in that clip. My interest in slapstick, which is something that we haven't really talked about, but Adam and Paul is very much homage to kind of Laurel and Hardy, and I love that kind of sad, soft, physical comedy very much. I find it very moving, and it's there in Beckett, in Spades, obviously. So that was Mark and my sort of juvenile homage to that.
David, I see you're the first to undo your button.
Yeah,
As
I'm
it were.
fascinated, Lenny, that you went into film, but where did you learn your craft as a director? You didn't learn it in the theatre, obviously, and most film directors start in the theatre and go on to cinema, but you went straight into cinema. So how did you do it?
That's a very good question, because they're sort of, I'm often asked by people, should I go to film school, or, you know, I think because the two routes, you're right, were traditionally theatre and then laterally film school. I learned it by, I mean, and I think this is still a huge part of how people learn filmmaking, is by watching massive amounts of film, but watching it critically and reading and understanding a little bit about how they were made, and then volunteering and doing sort of crappy jobs on other people's projects, so as I could see how the sausage was made, and then in the doing. So it was more of a kind of apprenticeship than it was a formal study. And I think had there been a sort of a really good film school at the time, maybe I would have thought about it. But I oddly, I think, like writing, you can sort of learn it by doing it. And I worked in different departments a bit on film, so I kind of got a bit more of a rounded picture of how things are done. And I'm good, you know, the funny thing, that capacity to learn, which I had as an academic person, definitely helped, you know, to sort of analyze and kind of work out how things. But the biggest question in film, which is really, really hard to answer, and you have to work to find it, is how do you make something feel a certain way? Like, how do you shoot anybody? I mean, that's not fair, but many people would be able to put together a series of shots which successfully covered a piece of action. You know, it mightn't be elegant, but it would do the job. And you see it on television all the time, just sort of a fairly mechanical approach to covering people's actions. You know, you have two people walking into a room to have a conversation. You have a wide shot where they walk into the room, and then they get them facing each other as quick as they can, because that's the easiest way to do it. And then they have one shot of one person over the shoulder and the other shot of the other person over the shoulder. That's the end of it. And most TV soap is just that again and again and again. And but if you want to deal in subtle shades of feeling and tone, that's where it gets really interesting. And I think the only way to work out how to do that is to just keep doing it.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. Are you happy with that, David? Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? I'll just read out. There's one from Ciara Gormley here that says, thanks, Lenny. Do you find it hard to know when you've reached the final edit with a film and not to make any more changes?
Yes, I do. And what's great in the film world, I suppose, as opposed to if you're making a painting in your studio, is you have an awful lot of other people screaming at you to. It's probably, if you're working towards an exhibition, it's the same. I presume there just comes a point where you go, okay, well, I have to stop. But there is also a sort of diminishing returns moment, I think, where you may still tinker, but you realize that nothing is fundamentally changing. And then that's probably the moment to leave it. It's a hard one. And I've, you know, watching something you've done in the cinema or whatever at a festival, it's always nerve-wracking, you know, because you think, oh God, what if I discover some new thought that I missed at the time? Yes.
Okay. Now, Deborah Grimes, I can see you're in here. Deborah, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, Lenny, it's great to see you. And just seeing that clip of Garage, it just brings me back. I remember how moved I was. Such a portrait of loneliness. It's incredibly strong film. I suppose I suppose my question really is that I've been in the industry for a while now, mostly as a scriptwriter, and kind of reached the point of really struggling. I don't know whether it's post-COVID, but really pushing things forward or really having people even looking at your work.
Yeah.
It's really difficult. I'm really sort of reaching sort of an impasse of feeling I've used up all the tools in my arsenal to move things forward. And it just seems like, is it the climate? Or I suppose my question is, I suppose for you, you'd have to really look back quite a while ago when you first started out. What were some of the craziest things you've done to really push things forward when you feel you're at this impasse and you can't, it's really difficult even getting people to notice your work, or you have this slate of work that you're trying to
Absolutely
move along, you know. Yeah.
I totally get that, because there's, you know, it goes back to that, how difficult it is when you're sort of, it is a lonely feeling, you know, going back to that idea of garage. And it's also a feeling when you think nobody cares whether I do this or that, and you're sitting there at your desk, and it's very easy to become very discouraged. I had a few years of that, because when I came back from America, having made this big decision that I was going to concentrate on trying to make films, there were about 5 years where I sat in my flat and didn't have any money and was writing, not really believing in what I was writing, sort of half, and then sharing it, and nobody's knocking on your door, you know, and it is a lonely place. And what I did to get over that, I said to myself, I just have to be doing something in this film world. I can't sit here. It's not healthy. I could feel myself beginning to lose heart. And so I went hell for leather to try and get any work I could, making anything. So I ended up sort of bullying my way into commercials. I made some sort of free demo commercials and stuff. I thought, first of all, I have to make a living, and secondly, I need to be shooting, because your muscles kind of waste away if you don't use them. So that was because I have no interest really in that kind of filmmaking, but it was a really good thing for me to do, because it just made movement. And through movement, I met people, and actually the producer of the commercials, Johnny Spears, that I worked with, he was the producer of Adam and Paul, and he met Mark O'Halloran and introduced us. And none of that would have happened probably if I hadn't just said, right, I'm going to do it. But I think what's difficult as a writer is that it is the hardest role in the industry. I really think that, because on the one hand, you're the person it all starts with. It's solo. And also you have, you know, people will take your work and sort of do whatever they want with it. So it's really hard in all aspects. I think the only thing you can do is ask yourself, maybe, is there any, and this is like, it's probably a longer conversation, but is there any way in which you can kind of go through a similar process, like adjacent to the things you really want to do, that just creates that energy and movement and contact, and you know what I mean? So it might not be the script that is your heart's desire. It might be like, is there anywhere, you know, can I write on something that I maybe don't love, but feel like it would at least become a kind of a conduit to other things. I think it's really hard. I do think, however, when you do make that shift, and you do get somebody's attention, and you do begin to get work out there, it's very sunny on the other side, because there's such a demand for material. There is such a kind of hunger for it.
Okay.
But yeah, that's sort of the best I can do. But I remember I had there was a long period where I thought I shouldn't have left philosophy. I made a terrible mistake. Nobody's interested. I'm even doubting it now. But I think you just have to sort of look where you are and say, what are the concrete steps, you know, just from where I am now, that maybe don't look like I want them to look, but you'd be surprised. You need to be moving. And if you're moving, you never know where you'll end up. But if you just wait, nothing, you know, it's possible nothing will happen. So I think it's worth it.
It's true. Yeah. I'm actually currently novelizing a script. So that seemed like
that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
That's a really, really good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Lenny, can I just ask you something quickly? Are you an Irish language speaker? I was curious. Do you speak Irish?
No, but my grandfather, the famous grandfather, he was actually, he got Scala in Trinity as in Irish, in French and Irish, and then he did medicine. So there were Irish speakers. I wish I was. My son's actually going to the Gaeltacht. And so I'm hoping are you?
Yes. Yeah.
I wish I was.
Just kind of in terms of cinema, I was kind of interested in trying to go down that road, but I was curious.
Oh, well, that's, I mean,
yeah.
Did you see on Colleen Kuhn?
I did. Yeah. Yeah.
Great, isn't it?
Yeah. Loved it. Yeah. I think most people probably have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thanks, Deborah. That was great. Deborah, I know, and she made a wonderful short film called The Yellow Dress.
Thank you.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I can send you a link to it.
Yeah, brilliant.
But she's a great scriptwriter. I mean, I'm just wondering from her point of view, is the answer to get an agent in this business or not?
I don't think so. I think, I mean, it's very different. Like, I didn't get an agent until I got an agent in the UK after Adam and Paul. So I made Adam and Paul without an agent. And then I didn't get an American agent until two films after that.
Yes.
And I think it depends on what you want to do. Nothing has ever come in through the agent that I've done. It's always been generated on this side, although Frank came from a contact in film 4, and I love my agent. She's amazing and brilliant for advice and negotiation and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's essential, but and you probably won't get one these days until you've got something out there. That's the reality of it as well.
Yeah. I think the positive as well, Lenny, and I'm only doing this from reading, is the amount of facilities for film production in Ireland shot through the roof. It's extraordinary.
Amazingly. Yeah. And actually, if you're interested, if you're a director, if you want to be a director, it's a really good time because you can go and make stuff even on your phone at a really high level. I mean, when I was starting, somebody had to give you real money to buy actual film, and a film camera and all that stuff. So it's very possible. And there is a huge kind of network here now. When I made my first short, there were 2 shorts made in Ireland that year and no features. I mean, it's amazing when you think about it now. Like it's a,
Yeah, extraordinary. I'm just going to run through some of the comments that have been made because they don't appear on YouTube when we have the recording. So I'll run through them. Bernadette Kiley says, is Frank available to view, please?
Yes, Frank is. It has been on and off Netflix, but if it's not on one of the streaming services, it'll be available on, for example, iTunes or any of those movie buying sites that you can get on your either smart TV or your computer.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Maggie says to everybody, whoops, she's slipped there. Sorry. First time joining an episode of The Art as Well. Class job. Thanks, everyone.
That's very nice.
That's nice. Thanks very much.
I'll take that as a credit to me, Alan. I think.
Almost definitely.
Yourself.
Absolutely. Eilish says, great episode. Great to have The Art as Well back again. My question for Lenny, of all your creative endeavors, which one are you most proud of and why?
Oh, wow.
Damn, I was meant to say that one.
That's a really hard one, I'm really proud.
Like asking which your favorite child is.
Yes, exactly.
Try it anyway.
I'll have a crack. I actually think possibly, in a way, aspects of Garage probably because it's very simple and and actually you're asking about music. There's one music cue really, apart from the top and the tail in the whole of Garage, and the fact that you can watch something as boldly as that and that it works for me is a kind of, I think it's very close to what we were trying to achieve. And it's I feel very proud of it. Yeah.
Alico says, fascinating interview. Thank you for that. Yeah, I got that one. Terrific listening to both. Gillian, are there any courses in cinematic photography? I do my own photography, but it'd be very interesting to do that.
Yes, there are, and I'm not sure now. I think in various ways. So there are ones that would be part-time. There are various colleges that offer them. I don't have that at my fingertips, but if you go Googling, I mean, you could go to film school as a cinematographer. That's quite a big commitment, but then there are shorter courses in cinematography, and it's a great thing because it's the marriage of photography and movement, and huge amount of what's interesting about photography and what you need to know from photography carries over into cinematography. But if you think about it just technically, when you set up a photograph, it just has to be right from that precise angle. And, and then you're trying to create a situation where you're able to move around a room and still to have it work and not shadow, and, the shadow of the person operating the camera, and all these highly technical things become considerations. It's really interesting work.
Yeah. Okay, Maria Gabriela Serpi, who's in Rome, she's a great fan and she's stuck with us over in Rome. When a movie is not based on a novel, how do you start working? Is that the case? Is it contacting a scriptwriter in the first step? Sorry.
Well, so in the case of, say, what Richard did was inspired by a real event, and there was a novel as well, but we really didn't use the novel, even though. So in that case, it's quite interesting. It was a conversation between me and Mal Campbell, who wrote it, but I really also sort of devised it in that we got the actors together in that case and worked with the actors to develop the story. So that was an unusual one. Frank existed because John Ronson had worked with a man called Frank Sidebottom. And so that grew out of something half real as well. With Garage, Mark and I were sitting down, we'd made Adam and Paul, and we were talking about what the next project would be. And we started one thing and it didn't quite work out. And one day Mark told the story of this man in his town in Ennis when he was a kid who ran a garage, and something quite similar happened in the case of this man. And he did take his own life. And that's where that grew from. And what we did was we sat down and we talked it through. And then I wrote this big kind of outline of how the film might run based on our conversations. And then Mark wrote the screenplay. So there are various ways in which it happens. So the novel thing is very, it's very tempting because you have something there already and you can kind of, graft your own ideas onto it. But I'm going back now I'm writing at the moment, and it's a film that's sort of set in my own childhood in the kind of Jewish family in Dublin. And that's just me with a strong kind of set of images.
Okay. We're nearly at time, but there's two more if you don't mind, Lenny.
Not at all.
Okay, so Brenda Moore McCann, who's an art historian, she's asked a question talking about lighting. Would Caravaggio in painting and Orson Welles in cinema have been of interest to you?
Definitely. I mean, the Caravaggio, is such a kind of feels so modern when you look at him, like that kind of what feels like kind of single source, very immediate. I think he may have used one of those, isn't the theory that he may have used one of those kind of pinhole cameras to create an image to work from. Yes. But yeah, there's a kind of sense of movement and arrested movement and energy, and the lighting there is very beautiful, and also cold, which I love, kind of cold lighting, cold light. And Welles, yes, I've never been Welles as a technician. I sometimes find it it's very self-aware in that sense. But if you look at like Welles, actually, the person who's closer to me than Welles would be Renoir, who also, Renoir, the son of Renoir, the painter, who made these extraordinary films, again, with that very deep focus and moving bodies in the frame. So the frame remains where it is. And you tell the story by moving objects within that, moving people within that. And there's a film of his which is called The Rules of the Game, Les Règles de Jeu, which I would absolutely recommend so highly. It's a sort of it's a kind of evisceration of upper class manners in France at the time, but it's amazing, and I think it's a good example of there's something Wellesian in it, but I sort of think there's more heart in there.
Yeah. Lenny, we've taken up enough of your time. Thank you so much.
Not at all. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I know, it's been my pleasure, and I know everyone else's. And, on their behalf, thank you so much for being with us today and giving of your time. Have you any immediate plans? Apart from bringing the dogs for a walk.
Apart from bringing my daughter to drama.
Yeah.
My only, here's the dog.
Yeah.
The only other plan is, just I'm going to see something in the Fringe tonight, and then keep on working towards this project that I was mentioning about, set in my family, sort of adjacent to my family in the 70s is what I'm going to be working on for the next few months.
Fantastic. Listen, Lenny, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. It was an absolute pleasure.
I wish you every future success.